Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be telling you about all of the books that I read in January. You know the drill. I read some literary fiction, some poetry, some non-fiction, some YA, and I even read a graphic novel. So let's get straight into the books. So the first book that I finished in January was a poetry collection, and that was Kuma Condor by Kayo Chingonyi. This is a contemporary poetry collection and it is the author's debut collection. So I did a little bit of research while I was reading this collection, and a Kuma Condor is a kind of initiation ceremony that young men from a certain Zambian tribe have to pass through before they are considered men. This is a prominent theme in this collection, as is the more general exploration of passages between different things. So we have different worlds, the past and the present, the living and the dead, how you are perceived versus how you actually are. So this collection had a lot of strengths. It was a very perceptive look at themes such as culture and Britishness and race and grief and masculinity. These are all things that I really enjoy reading about in lots of different formats, and there were definitely a few really insightful moments. I liked the structure of the poems in here generally. They weren't massively experimental. They were kind of a standard length and rhythm, I'd say. The language choices were often very interesting. I liked thinking about them and picking them apart, and I really liked the sound of a lot of these poems read aloud. Ultimately though, this collection didn't have a massive emotional impact on me, and it hasn't really stuck with me since. While the poems in here were really interesting and important in many ways, there wasn't a lot in here for me to relate to, and I think that might have been the problem. But I do think that this was a good collection, and for a debut it was very strong. I would definitely recommend it if you like contemporary poetry, or if this kind of poetry sounds interesting to you, definitely give it a go. In the end, I gave Kuma Condor 3 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up a non-fiction book, and that was Meg, Jo, Beth and Amy, The Story of Little Women and Why It Still Matters by Anne Boyd Rue. So this is a non-fiction book that looks at the life of Louisa May Alcott, the author of Little Women, and it also looks at Little Women as a book and different interpretations of it and why it is still relevant to modern readers, both male and female. If any of you don't know, I love Little Women. It is one of my favourite books of all time. I have read it over and over again. I actually received this book last Christmas, being particularly interested in the book's discussion of viewing the text through a feminist lens. Very recently, I of course saw the new film adaptation of Little Women. Absolutely loved it. It was amazing, and that spurred me on to finally pick this book up. And I did really enjoy this book. About a third of it is about Louisa May Alcott and her childhood and her adulthood and her family life, and I kind of enjoyed this bit. I know that a lot of people really love reading and learning about their favourite authors, but I'm just not one of those people. For me, the novel that I love and the author who wrote it are just two very distinct things. Of course, I'm interested in these authors in the sense that they may be incredible feminist figures like Jane Austen, for example. But for me, that's just separate to the fact that they're the authors of my favourite books. Is that weird? So the section on Louisa May Alcott as a woman was not my favourite. She was a very interesting woman, and it was certainly pleasant enough to read, but it wasn't what I was there for. The second section of the book focused on Little Women as a phenomenon from the time when it was published to present day. This included talking about show and TV adaptations and the ways that it's influenced fashion and literature. But my favourite part of the book by far was the latter third of the book, which discussed different critics' responses to the text and different lenses through which you can view the text. This felt like studying English again at university, and not in a bad way. So I enjoyed this book as a whole. It made me think about and reflect on a book which I love so much, even though there wasn't quite as much critical analysis as I would have liked. So in the end, I gave this one 3.5 stars. The next book that I read in January was With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. This is a YA novel that follows a high school senior senior called Emily who lives with her abuela, her grandma, and her young daughter. Emily loves to cook and she dreams of running her own kitchen one day, but for the time being she just has to juggle figuring out what classes to take at school and earning some money to support her family and bringing up her young daughter and navigating new romantic relationships. I was very excited about this book. I had heard so many great things about this author. I know that her previous book, The Poet X, was wildly popular, and then Cameron's little sister actually bought me this for Christmas because she had read it and enjoyed it, so I was very pleased. So I liked a lot about this book. On the whole, I really loved the characters and their central relationships. The main character, Emily, was awesome. I really liked her and had a really clear picture of her in my mind. I thought her relationship with her daughter was represented really well. It was genuinely really nice to read about, and it presented a lot of very interesting struggles in what I assume is a very honest and insightful way. I also loved reading about Emily's relationship with her grandmother and her best friend. They were so great and mutually supportive and really believable, and they were just really sweet. I also really loved the focus on food in this book. It was so unique and really refreshing. It was just such a cool element to add to a book that I had never really experienced before, and I really enjoyed it. But there is a but. The thing that really let me down in this book, the thing that really stopped me loving it and actually pissed me off, was the central romantic relationship, especially at the beginning. There were a lot of things that I found problematic in this relationship. Consent was an issue. There were a lot of small instances in the book where the central guy would intentionally ignore Emily's boundaries and overstep them. For example, at one point early on in the novel, Emily is saying that they are not friends and she doesn't want to be having a conversation with him, and he playfully leans in and starts moving a curl away from her face. No, there was definitely problematic toxic masculinity, overprotective vibes as well. There was one point when he was walking alongside her on the side of the cars on the pavement so that he could protect her, and this was stated very plainly as if this was very normal and necessary. None of this was questioned or challenged or explored. It was either placidly accepted or worse, it was framed as cute and endearing. This really surprised me because this book is great in so many ways. It explores tons of really contemporary issues in a very feminist and forward-thinking way, and then on the other hand we have these boundaries being intentionally violated, but it's okay because he's cute. This relationship just really confused me and really annoyed me. I don't know why it was handled in this way, and it just massively let the book down for me. So I have very mixed feelings about this book. It was so great in so many ways, but it definitely had problems that I can't get over. So in the end, I gave this one 3 stars. Next, I picked up a graphic novel, and that one was The Sculptor by Scott McCloud. This is my friend's favourite graphic novel ever, and I've been wanting to read more graphic novels for a while because I've hardly read any, and so I thought this would be a good one to pick up. This one follows the story of a young man who makes a deal with death. He is able to sculpt any art he wants with his bare hands, but he only has 200 days to live. And yes, he does meet the love of his life within these 200 days. I really enjoyed this book. I really liked the premise. It's really unique, and I really enjoyed following the storyline. It was lovely, very clever, and definitely emotional in places. I didn't quite cry, but I did well up a couple of times. I enjoyed the illustration style a lot. It is in duochrome, so black and white with different shades of blue, and I found this to be very visually pleasing, and the illustrations generally just felt really dynamic to me. One of the things that impressed me the most throughout this book was the pacing of the story. Through the amount of text and the size of the illustrations and their different styles, Scott McCloud really managed to make time seem as though it was speeding up in moments and then really slowing down down in others. There was a real sense of momentum and drive in certain places as the plot worked up to a climax, and this was really immersive and really well done. So I thought this was really great. I didn't massively fall head over heels in love with it, but I think that's probably because graphic novels aren't really my thing. But as they go, this was fab. It had all of the elements that I could want, and I would definitely recommend it. So in the end, I gave The Sculptor 4 out of 5 stars. And the final book that I read in January was a highly anticipated one, and that was Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This is a new literary fiction novel that follows a young black woman called Amira who babysits for an upper middle class white family. One night at a supermarket, Amira is accused of kidnapping the toddler who she is looking after, and the novel basically just takes off from there, exploring most primarily Amira's relationship with her well-intentioned employer. I wanted to love this novel. I went into it so determined to love it, and it started off really strongly. I became so confident that this book was going to blow me away, but it didn't quite manage to deliver all the way through to the end for me, and I was left feeling a little bit sad. So like I said, this novel started off really well. I was immediately hooked by the premise, and I was super excited to see what Kylie Reid was going to do with it. I loved the themes that were explored, reading about things like motherhood and race and privilege and family with things that intrigued me all the way through. And I found the author to have a lot of really interesting and fresh and really blunt views on these topics, which is great. It is what we need. I also really enjoyed the writing style. The characters were great. Their voices in particular came through really strongly. I loved the dialogue between Amira and her friends, and between Amira and the little girl she was looking after. I just thought she was a fab character. She was very well realized in my head with all of her different quirks, and I really enjoyed reading about all of her different relationships. But everything just kind of dropped off for me in the second half of the novel. It felt like Kylie Reid couldn't quite keep up the momentum and the greatness with which she started off with, which in my experience is quite typical of debut writers. The plot waned a bit. It didn't do as much as I thought it was going to, and the characters lost me a bit as well. I thought they became a bit weaker, a bit more confused. Amira especially did things at the end of the novel which really surprised me, and they didn't convince me at all. So ultimately, I would say that this was a good debut. I would recommend it if it sounds interesting to you, but I just didn't find the execution to ultimately be the best. But I do know that a lot of people really loved this book all the way through to the end. They didn't seem disappointed by the second half at all, so who knows, maybe it's just me. So in the end, I gave Such a Fun Age 3.5 stars. So those were all the books that I read in January. Thank you so much for listening to me chat about them. As always, if you've read any of the books, please let me know what you thought about them down below in the comments. I always love to hear your thoughts. And let me know if you've read anything good in January as well. I would really love to know what you've all been reading. Thanks again, everyone. I hope you're all well, and I will see you really soon with another video. Bye.